Hopefully, this will come back. Hopefully, hopefully. Come on. Right. So, apologies for diving off back there. I had to sort some bits and pieces out. I want to finish this, so let's go on. So we have the tutorial, and this is where it was left off. Let's go back to PHP Storm here. I just want to, I tell you what, before I do that, let's address some of the comments that were in the actual live stream. So some people are asking what software I use to broadcast. Well, I use OBS, which is Open Broadcast Studio or software. It's very, very good. It allows me to flick between scenes and stuff. It's very nice. I just wish I had another screen here that I could have that on to control. And thank you ever so much for the nice comments about the nice tutorials and stuff. That's always lovely to hear. So we're now back into the tutorial. Let's go back in. This is where we left off. Now the problem with sessions is that when you're setting a session and you're changing that, you have to ensure that you're not resetting that when you start. So here, when we've got the session start, we're creating a session, forgotten password, and we're adding an encounter of 1. That's the default session. We're then doing a bunch of checks to ensure that we have a forgotten password part of the session, and then we're doing a check whether or not we've got a counter. It doesn't have to be like this. It could be formatted in any kind of way. It could just simply be a number, but I like to have things in perhaps little domains. So this is the forgotten password bit. There could be another section under here, which is something else, that kind of thing. And then here, what we're doing is we're incrementing. We've got the session counter here, and we're just incrementing it. So that's the incremental plus is just incrementing. And then we're setting that as a variable above it. That we're going to use later on. Of course, if the counter section hasn't been set, if that hasn't been set at all, then we want to set that to be 1, like so. Now, like I said, with sessions, you have to be careful because when you're setting them, when you go back to the page, you'll end up resetting them. So in this case, this logic isn't actually going to work because we're always going to have forgotten password. We're always going to have a counter because it's defined here. Counter is already set to 1, and therefore this will always be 1, right? So yes, we have that. We do increment this, but when we refresh the page, we're resetting it all back to 1. So that's why whenever I refresh the page, and I'll just prove this now. Let's go back into the browser. The browser, it will always be a single figure. Let's just, if I can find the damn tab. There we go. Refreshing the page. It will always be whatever it's been set to, right? So let's go back into the tutorial, and what we need to do is reset this on every request. Resetting basically means we are establishing the fact that we don't have the forgotten password, and therefore we need to build it. So we're going to put in an else here, and let's just put some space around these things like so. So in this case, we don't have the forgotten password. That hasn't been set, and so we can set that. We can grab that down here, and we can put this in here like so. So we are ensuring that this will always start with 1, which means that will be true. That will then run, and that will be incremented. And because we're in this part of the control flow, we're no longer in this part. This part will only be ever ran if the session forgotten password just doesn't exist. So if I save that and go back into the old browser, refresh, that should be jumping now, right? So that should now be counting itself up and so forth. Whereas if I was to, let's just Control Z this, save that, what I've done if I go back to the tutorial is I've removed that and put that up here. Let's just remove the else for now. Let's save that and go back into the old browser and refresh. We are going to reset ourselves back to 2. So that's something that you've got to be cautious with when dealing with sessions here. Let's go back to the tutorial and start and push on a bit. So let's just add that back into here. So like so, copy that into here, blah, blah, blah. Whoa, too many copies. Okay, so we're establishing the fact that we now have a counter, and that's being incremented. In fact, we don't need to have that because that's already going to be set, because that'll only happen if we don't have the counter, and we do have the counter by default here. So there we go. We've tied it up a little bit. So now we can actually do a check. We can actually check whether or not there is this counter is greater than or equal to an amount that we want to check. So up here, I'm just going to create a variable. Up here, we're going to have like sort of threshold, if you will. We're going to set that to 7. I think that was the challenge. And then here we're just going to create a simple function. In fact, I'm going to put it up here like so. We're just going to call check number, like so. Let's just put the session start at the top. So that's the threshold, and that's going to get the counter. So that's the current counter is equal to, and we're going to grab this from there, right? So we're going to do session here is equal to forgotten password, and then also counter. I'm just going to copy that in, otherwise I'll spell it wrong, like so. So that is the value that we've set in our session. Now we need to check that against the threshold. So we can do if counter is greater than or equal to threshold, which I haven't supplied into this scope yet, but at this point we then we then say, oh, whoa, you haven't you've requested more times than you should have. So we're going to put in a threshold here. That is going to be the amount. We're going to just set that to be 7 by default. That means we don't have to have that now. That's fine. So it's going to check that against the threshold. We need to do something if that has happened. You could say that we could have an else here, which then does an increments that. But the way I like to code things is I like to have like a single responsibility of these functions. This is called check number. This is all it's going to do, is it's going to check the number. It's not going to set the number, it's going to check the number. So if counter is threshold, is greater than threshold, in fact, let's call this something else. Let's call it, instead of check number, let's call this, because a check number, if you think about how you can use like modulus 11 type of formatting of numbers, a check digit is something completely different to just checking a number. So let's not call it check number. Let's call is, because that's going to return a boolean, is either true or false. So is over limit, right? Over threshold. Let's make it a little bit more concise. Over threshold, like so. So that's going to return a boolean. So is we're going to have this as a variable. So is over threshold. We're going to set that to be set that by default to be true. We're always going to by default lock someone out, always be sort of defensive in the code. So is over threshold is equal to true. Then we're saying, so if the counter is greater than or equal to the threshold, that is also going to be true. So we can flip this, so we can say if that is less than the threshold, then is over threshold is equal to false. We then return is over threshold, right? So what we're doing here is we're checking the session, we're getting the counter, we are checking if the counter is less than the desired threshold. If it is less than, we set is over threshold to be false and we return it. This function here has only got a single responsibility. It is only checking if the number is over the threshold. We could also, in fact, instead of passing in the session. We might want to use this function in other things. So you could have value here. So we could be checking the value of the threshold of that. So instead of getting that out, which now makes it a little bit more simpler. In fact, we can go one step further than this. We can make this into a ternary operator. Let's just put that up here for now, just to save that for now. So in fact, what we can do is we can do this. So instead of just returning is over threshold, we do like this. So brackets, and then if the value is less than the threshold, then what we do is we return true. False. Beg your pardon. If it's less than the threshold, then it's false. Else, it's true. All right. So, which means that we don't have to have any of this stuff. We've just made it that simple. It is literally checking if that value is less than that value, and if it is, then it's false. If it's greater, if it is that value, or if it is greater than that value, it's then set to true. Which means that we can do function. Not function, sorry, we're calling that. We can do is over threshold, passing in the counter, and we're going to just leave that default to be 7. But if we wanted to, we can change that to be something else. So that's how you can sort of like condense your thoughts to make your code nice and clean. It is only doing a single responsibility. It's only returning a Boolean. So let's actually put some comments into here. That's actually just returning a bool. Which is fine. So let's just grab this from here. We obviously need to do the checking before we do, after we set it, right? Like so. So if is over threshold, we now have to do something about that. What we're going to do is just set, just print that out for the time being. So let's just have an if statement. So if is over threshold. So if it is over the threshold, then we do something else. We can do something else. That's fine. Let's bring that out a little bit. So let's just deal with this. So let's do an echo of you are over the threshold, right? And then we do you can make more requests or something, right? And then we're going to obviously just keep printing that out, I guess. So let's just double check the code. So if is over threshold, passing in the value, and the threshold has a default value of 7, and then that's all good. I guess what you could do is, and I'll do it in a minute, is I will define what threshold is later on, so we can actually find out how many requests we have left and how many requests, what the threshold was, that kind of thing. Let's just save all of this, just to tidy up the code a little bit and save that. I'm going to go to the browser and just check out what's going on. So let's go back to here. Right, refreshing the page, you can see you can make more requests. So let's just make another request. You can make more requests. 5, 6, 7, you are over the threshold. 8, you are over the threshold. 9, you are over the threshold. So let's tidy this up a little bit more. Let's create a reset, okay, because obviously you need to reset these things. So let's do function reset of the counter. And this is going to set this counter to be 1 maybe, or to be 0. Let's just save it to 1. Okay, so let's just reset this now. So is over threshold, blah 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 blah. I'm just going to reset the whole thing. Let's just put it up to here. Well, let's do it here. Oh, beg your pardon, sorry. What I've done, beg your pardon. What I've done is I've created a reset part counter, and it's just a function counter, setting that to 1, which means that I can reset the counter like so, which means that when I do go back to the browser, it should hopefully reset the whole thing back to 1 so it can make more requests. It basically means that I can flick between the two. Otherwise, it's just going to keep increasing itself, and so forth. Because if it is over the threshold, and perhaps if it is after a certain amount of times, then you would obviously want to reset the counter to allow them to add some more bits and pieces, right? To make some more requests. So one thing I'm going to do here is I'm just going to define a threshold. I know I did this earlier, but let's just say that this is 5. Okay, that is, it's not going to go into this function, that's fine. It's only going to go into the function when we call the function. But it means that we can do counter threshold, passing that into here. And you can make, you are over the threshold of, and we can do sort of 5 requests, right? Let's just concat that to the string, like so. Save that, refresh this page back into the browser, and we should see that we have that has been concated. So let's just comment that out, actually, otherwise that's just going to keep resetting. We don't want to do that. Go back to the browser and refresh. So that's 2, 3, 4, 5. So you are over the threshold of 5 requests. Okay, which means that you perhaps need to have to wait a little bit longer for the next thing. You might have a timer, right? You might say that you can only make 5 requests in the first say 30 minutes or 15 minutes or what have you. So you could in the tutorial have some way of checking that. You could have a way of saying, well, if it is 5 requests, but the timer is greater than, say, 3 minutes, then reset the counter. That kind of stuff. So you would store in not only the counter, but you would also store the amount of or the time that the last request happened, right? So you would store that up as well, and then you would do the check on both of those cases. Now, where we've got you can make more requests like this, it doesn't actually say how many requests you should make. And it's probably best to not do that because you don't want to give that kind of information away. In fact, you probably don't want to give the amount of requests away either. So, in fact, let's just remove this because, the more information you give someone, if they're trying to do something maliciously, then the more information you give them, the more they learn about the system, the more they can understand how to get around the system. So you are over the threshold, try again later, that kind of thing. So even if you had a timer on here, you wouldn't want to say when they can start because they might be creating a bot that actually hammers this thing after that amount of time. If they know how much time it is until their requests are allowed again, then they could create a bot that does that. So that's not good. You basically want to be as generic as possible with these messages. You are over the threshold, please try again. So we're still back into the back. Let's just remove the die here. We don't need that anymore. Let's just save that. Go back into the browser. Let's just tidy this up a little bit. So what we're doing is we're landing on this page and we're saying you are over the threshold, try again later, but we're still allowing them to send an email. So what we really should be doing is sending this as a message back to perhaps the login page. So what we could do is do a header redirect. So let's say, for example, we do, and we could store this as flash messages in the session. So when you're over the threshold, let's try that out. We could set that to be message, and we're going to equal that to this, and then set that to message as well. Well, actually, if they're not over the threshold, then that should be then they don't need to see that. But if they are over the threshold, what we should do is do a header. Let me remember how to do this. This is header, and it's a location. Whoopsie. And we're basically redirecting it to the login page. So it is / and then login.php. So we're redirecting it to that, and also we need to put in a die to exit that out. And the message we can actually store in the session, because it's a session, we can use that, we can pull that information out from the other page. So let's do session again, and let's just put in message, and we're going to equal that to be the message, like so, or we could just make it nice and tidy. Just set that to the string, like so. Oh gosh, I've just realized, sorry, I'm not in here. And I'm trying to do things nice and quick now. That's why I'm not flicking between the two. Sorry, what I've done, I'll recap, is I've got the session message, and I'm setting that to "you are over the threshold, please try again." And we're doing a header redirect. We're redirecting back to the login page, and then we're killing that, like so. And what I'm going to do is we're going to reset this, and let's just go back, double check a couple of things. Bear with me just a second. Yeah, excellent. Okay, right. So what I'll do is I'll just reset that. Go back to here. Bear with me just a minute. I was just testing that out before I showed you the browser. So let's just remove the reset. Let's go back into the browser here. Okay, so I'm going to refresh this page, and again, and again, and again, but this time it goes back to the login page because the threshold has already been we've gone over the threshold, so therefore we've gone back to the login thing. Now we've set the message here. We've got the message of "you are over the threshold, please try again" later, which means that we can pull this out from the session in the other page, right? So let's just grab message, and in the login.php here, what we can do is we can grab, so if is set session, and I called it message, like so. Let me just double check my spelling. I'm in the tutorial here. Message. So we're going to grab the message, put this into here. So we're now into the login page. So if we have the message in the session, then we can actually print that out. So we can do sort of echo, and you might, you're going to tidy this up, right? This could be a red message or something. So we're going to do echo, and we're just going to print that out, echo session of the message. Obviously, what we need to do, like we've done before, is start the session off. Okay, let me go back. I'm just going to tidy up a couple of bits and pieces. Let's just set that up like so. Just bear with me 2 seconds whilst I just double check a couple of things. Oops, no, of course not. There we go. Good. Let's reset that. Go back to nope. There we go. Right, why do I call these things so different? Right, we need to remove the reset. So uncomment that out. Save that. Now go back into the browser. This time I'm actually going into the browser so I can actually show you what I'm doing. So let's refresh the page, and again, and again, and again, and there we go. We're now into going back to the login, and we are now over the threshold. Please try again. If we forcibly went back to the forgotten password, we would still be redirected back to this page because the session is still active because we've started the session. So even if we clicked on here, we would go back to this page. So that's how I would do it. That's how I would block people for requesting something too often. You would have a counter, and what I've done here is allowed this to be flexible, so you can have a threshold of whatever you want. It is relatively simple. We have the is over threshold function here with passing in the counter that you've got and the threshold. This is the logic that decides how you can increment the counter, right? So if the forgotten password just doesn't exist, then we just print that out, or we just set that to be 1, and then on the next refresh of the page, on the next PHP request, we then increment that up. So that goes like 1, 2, 3, 4, and so forth. And each time on each request, we are checking is over the threshold, passing in the number in the counter against the threshold that we've defined up here, which is what this is doing, and that's just returning a Boolean. Yes, you could do all of this outside of functions, but I quite like having functions, because you can the reset counter, for example, will just reset that back to 1, and it's very handy to do that when you are debugging and you're testing. And also, like I said, if we were to capture when the user actually did this, so perhaps there was a sort of a date time thing. So when the last refresh was happened, then you would want to reset that too. So for example, if you've made 7 requests in 5 minutes, but now you're over you're on the 6th minute, the 7th minute, that kind of thing, you might want to reset that counter. What you don't want to do is block something forever. And going back to the IP addresses, I know that the whole question was specifically on IP addresses, but it's not a very good idea to do that, in the sense that you could be blocking people that you don't intend to block, because they might be going through a router, they might have their IPs masked, that kind of thing. So I would personally do it on a user-by-user basis, using perhaps a session like this. If you want to store this information, then I wouldn't couple this information against your other data. So I wouldn't store this information against the database that is storing the information about perhaps your e-commerce products or what have you, because this, in my opinion, is disposable data. Because if you have, say, thousands and thousands of these requests in your database, what are you going to do with all that information? What are you going to do with the amount of information that you picked up yesterday or 3 months ago or a year ago? Is that actually relevant to you? And so if you are storing this information, you need to ask yourself, well, how much of this information do I actually need, and how often do I need to clear this information out? So you might have to have like a script, like a cron script, that goes through, deletes all the requests that were made, say 3 months ago, if that's your limit. This is going further on from this tutorial, but these are the considerations that you have to make. The decisions that you make now on how you configure your system is going to tailor how your system acts and behaves in the future. So you just have to be very cautious. Yeah, I hope that this has answered that question. If I go back to the browser, maybe I can get that question up. I don't know. Probably not. But anyway, I hope that it answers that question. And if you've got any coding challenges that you would like me to do later on, then let me know. But I need to dive off now because I need to get on and do some bits and pieces. But thanks ever so much for watching. Happy coding, everyone. I'll see you again soon. Cheers. Bye.